Hello and welcome to episode 16 of my D&D show Ask a DM, where I take questions from the community and answer them live. Sometimes I'm joined with some guests, and this week I'm trying something a little bit different and hopefully it goes well. Could be an absolute disaster, but what I've done, I have shared a link to a load of my creator friends and told them that they can come and jump into the stream whenever they like. So I might be joined by some other creators as we go on in this stream, but to start, it's just me. It's just going to be me. So I have got some questions from Twitter and from Discord that I'm going to ask. And any of you who are watching, if you go ahead and in the comments or in the live chat, sorry, put any questions you have, and I will answer them. And if I am joined by other creators along the way, they can come in and answer them as well. I should also say that I restream from YouTube, Twitch, and Facebook. So if you're watching on any of them, just ask away and we can get into the questions. So, yeah, I'm going to start with the questions that I've already taken from Twitter. While I wait, I should also say this is the first stream on this new channel. So, for those of you that missed it, I moved from my usual Shrike DnD YouTube channel over to this one, and it looks like we've already got a guest. So I'm just going to add you in now. Hello.
Why, hello there.
How are you doing?
I'm fan-frickin-tastic. How about yourself?
Yeah, not bad. Thank you for coming by. Just doing some alterations with your camera, I see.
Yes.
Do you want to go ahead and introduce yourself to everyone that's watching?
How's it going? I'm no fun allowed, and contrary to my name, I sometimes allow fun.
Only sometimes.
Only
Cool.
sometimes.
Well, let's. I'm going to ask you some generic questions then, just so people can get a
I'll give you
feel of
generic
what type
answers in
of.
response.
Perfect. Sounds like a good match. So when you DM, do you usually homebrew or do you run modules?
I started off homebrew, and then I transitioned over to modules, and now I'm at a pretty solid balance of 50-50. It really comes down to what my players want out of the game, because some people just want to, a nice linear adventure where, it's all sunshine and rainbows, and some people want a entirely fresh new experience, and I'm willing to provide it.
Perfect. And what sort of level is your favorite to DM at?
That depends system to system, but I assume we're talking about 5e here. For 5e, I typically like the range of 1 to 5, and then all of a sudden I like the transition over to 16 to 20,
Yeah.
because low level D&D has an air of mystery to it, an air of fear and excitement. And I think that a lot of that does get lost in the later levels, because, you got the wizard can cast fireball, and the barbarian has all the HP, and all that stuff. And then all of a sudden you take that all the way to the high end of things, level 16 and up, and then you're like, okay, I'm going to throw a god at you. How are you going to handle it? And I really like that transition between the different styles of play.
Yeah, it seems like there's quite a lot of people out there that actually enjoy first level or first 5 level as a DM, and it makes sense, I guess, 'cause it's the more dangerous level before they get stuff like Revivify and stuff, which is sort of like a reset button for the players. Cool. Well, let's go ahead and start answering some questions from Twitter, if that's okay with you.
Alrighty.
Let's go. So we got Pro DM Timothy, who asked, "What's the silliest voice you've done for a NPC?" So I guess first, do you do voices?
The only time I'm ever talking in my regular me voice is purely as from a DM's perspective, because I really like separating, the DM from the NPC. So if I'm talking like this, then you know that you're talking to me. But then I talk like this, and you're talking to Meatball, the cowboy. And then I've got Burglin's the name, Knacklin's the game. Burgle Knackle the gnome, here to provide your rogue services. I really like to have that, disposition between the voices, and it makes characters memorable, and it's a great way to keep me on track with the NPC.
How much effort do you put into learning different voices? and stuff like
None at
that?
all. What
Okay.
I do is I've got an NPC drafted, and whether this be some hag or this be the lovable hireling that the party just hired on for services. I don't think about their voice until literally the moment thereof, and I throw something out there, and hopefully it sticks. A
Yeah, I
lot
think
of times, well, go on.
I was gonna say I think quite a lot of people are nervous to try voices in case they sound stupid in the moment, but it's just about being comfortable really with sounding stupid because you are going to sometimes.
Yeah, I think that's the important part. Is if you're not being stupid, are you even playing D&D? Like, if you're not making a fool of yourself, are you really playing the game? I think a lot of people want to present the idea of like a perfect game and a perfect world and perfect NPCs and this and that, but it's not gonna be perfect. Get over it.
Yeah,
You're gonna
definitely.
mess things up, and I promise you, the messing up is gonna be that much more memorable and enjoyable.
Yeah. And what about when it comes to voices? What about consistency over multiple sessions? Is there anything you have to do, or can you just innately do that?
So if it is like a talk about this, I think that is very natural. But when I talk with a certain cadence that goes along, if you're just watching me, sometimes I physically move my body, and that really helps out. Uh, it really comes down to the individual NPC. So like if I've got an NPC and I have their suave sophisticated as like one of their punchlines, then I know I can talk like this and do. But then I've got, sinister. Yes, dear master, I can talk like this, you know. But most important of all is not only having those few like one or two lines about the character's description, but my players. My players keep me on point. If I do a voice and it's a few sessions before they run into that NPC again, and I'm sort of flubbing it a little bit, then they can remind me, "Oh, hey, didn't he sound like that?" And I'm like, "Oh yeah, that's right." And
Cool.
I think just that quick little moment can get me back on track with doing a fun voice.
Hmm. I think that is quite a skill actually, because I am one of the people that completely struggle to remember how a voice was, especially if I made it up in the moment. I completely forget what it was like, and I'm just like, I remember it was sort of Southern American, but I can't do it again. So I try, but I get the same thing as you, where quite a lot of my players will just point it out, and I'll be like, well. This is gonna have to be the new voice because I can't remember what the voice was now. So
And
got to
I think that's
change.
fine, honestly. Like, not to dissuade anybody, but if you do a voice for a character and you forget it and your players forget it, then,
Exactly.
maybe it wasn't worthwhile and maybe you do something else instead. You
Yeah,
know,
definitely. Cool. On to the next question then. So this is from TTRPG Music over on Twitter. How do you categorize your TTRPG music? Do you loop the same track over and over for a scene, or have a playlist, or how do you do it? Do you use music, I guess, is the first question.
yes, I do use music, and that entirely depends on the scenario. Sometimes, if they are exploring around, then I'll pop up, the WoW ambience music. If they're in the tavern, then I pull up that tavern loop of, all the little back chatter and stuff. If they're in combat, then I'll, pull up, whatever's the flavor of the month, whether that be, the Witcher music or I'm trying to think of all the other fantasy stuff going on, but stuff like that. And so I do have certain categories. Some things do get looped over and over, especially when I'm, more focused on the game at hand. Especially combat. If a combat drags on for a long time and I've only got like a 20-minute track on, then surprise, you're gonna hear that 20-minute track again. I can't be bothered. I've got too many moving pieces. But
And
when they're exploring around and I've got the generic fantasy music in the background, then I'll definitely switch it up for sure.
And how do you organize that? Do you have like a load of playlists on Spotify or YouTube or whatever you use, or do you have like a load of tabs open, or do you
That
pause
would just
before the?
generally be me just pulling up the UB Usually, I probably should actually get to doing a playlist. That would probably make too much sense.
Make your life easy a bit. I think it is good though for other DMs to understand that it's okay to sort of wing it in the moment. And I've done the same before, where we've ended up in an environment that I didn't have any music for, so I've quickly just jumped on YouTube, typed in "IC soundtrack" or something like that, and then found something. So yeah, I think it's a good tip for people that you
Yeah,
can
and
just do that. You
honestly,
don't have
like
to.
looking up something random, you're probably gonna at some point stumble upon something that you would have never stumbled upon before, and it'll be enjoyable. You'll be like, "Oh man, this new track is way better than that lame old track."
Yeah, definitely. I when I'm writing all of my prep and stuff, I put on some basically video game soundtracks, and sometimes I hear stuff while I'm listening to them, and I'm like, oh, that's much cooler than what I had planned. So I'm going to use that instead. Cool. Do you use music much in your games? Is it like always constantly on music and sounds?
Not always, not always. Sometimes one, I just completely forget the entire session and no one calls me out. But two, sometimes it just isn't really needed. Maybe we're focusing too much on the role play. Maybe there's just music sometimes can in fact detract away from the game at hand. If it's a super serious moment and I don't have the air quote super serious track or whatever, sometimes it's okay to just let things be still because, you know, I think in a way that could be even more immersive because your characters aren't hearing the music, right?
Yeah, makes sense, I guess. Sometimes silence is a good tool for storytelling. Okay, cool. Let's jump on to the next question. And anyone who is watching live, feel free to ask questions in the chat as well. But we'll keep going through all of these Twitter questions in the meantime. So, at Elven Tower asked, which is the official published adventure that you have played the most or your favorite one? Would you play again, and what changes would you make to the main storyline?
Yeah. So for those of you that don't know, my channel got as big as it did because I cover the 5e modules, and I've covered at this point, I believe, 7 of them, and I'm gonna be covering more and more. But god dang, it takes forever to get through those things because they're so big. My most favorite module of all of them is Tomb of Annihilation. That one for me just hits home in so many different ways. It is just absolutely gorgeous. It has a great place to explore. It's got great NPCs to socially interact with. It's great monsters to fight, great dungeons to delve into. I have ran it now 3 times, and I can't wait to run it more. I think that some of the other modules, I'm good with 1 or 2 playthroughs of it, but Tomb of Annihilation, I can't wait to run it again.
Which have you played then?
I have DM'd, played, or interacted with a large capacity with every single 5e module.
Oh, nice. Okay,
Every
so
single one.
what's the one you've liked the least then?
Ooh, man, that's a tough one. I'm looking at I don't have a bookshelf because I'm poor, but I've got like a stack of books over there on the side. I'm staring at them. Um, man, that's a tough one. I That's honestly a tough one because I like them all for certain aspects, but some of them just unfortunately don't do enough of what they're trying to do. So I'm looking over there and I see Prince of the Apocalypse. I like the beginning portion of Prince of the Apocalypse, and I like the end portion of Prince of the Apocalypse, but that center, the meat of the sandwich, as it were, is unfortunately just packed in all the wrong ways. It's like slapping olives and habanero, and all of a sudden putting peanut butter and jelly, and it's mixing a whole bunch of things, and I just don't think it works out well. So I'm thinking probably Prince of the Apocalypse would be my least favorite, but I think that it has just enough going on to make it somewhat redeemable.
Hmm. I think I've not played all of them, but I've read all of them, and I think every single book there's aspects that you could take from, which is usually why I homebrew most things, but I will take inspiration from the books. Out of the ones I have played, I think Rise of Tiamat was probably my least favorite, actually. From a DM point of view, I think
Mhm.
my players enjoyed it, but that's only because I had to alter Rise of Tiamat a lot because it wasn't made easy for you as a DM.
Yeah, Rise of Tiamat for sure. That like Rise of Tiamat and Horde of the Dragon Queen, that was early on in their development cycle, and
Yeah.
it clearly shows not only in their art style, but their design philosophy and their layout style. And like there's a lot of things going on for it, and it's very good that they moved away from that design because one, after that, they realized that they're never going to do sequel modules ever again because that's just a mistake. If you make a sequel to something, then you're immediately going to have people that don't get it because they didn't do the first one.
Yeah.
But two, just the idea of what you're doing in that adventure, and you know in the places you go, the things you see, there's just a lot of things going on that just don't mesh well.
Yeah, definitely. I think my favorite was Curse of Strahd. Actually, that's the favorite that I've DM'd. I think a big part of that is because of Strahd as a big bad. He's fun to play, I think.
Yeah, Strahd's got a really rich history because back in the days of old, and maybe even still to this day, the vast majority of villains were the final boss in the final room, in the final part of the dungeon that said one monologue line. You got into a fight, boom, that's that end of story. But Strahd was, in fact, the very first, air quote first, major villain that was actually semi-present. And
Mm,
if you actually go back and read Isaac's Ravenloft, you can see the design philosophy of, oh yeah, Strahd is very smart. Strahd moves around the castle. Strahd observes the party. Strahd does this. Strahd does, and most important of all, the villain has motivations, and that's something that I think a lot of people now require in games is that the villain does things. The villain has motivations. The villain has a reason, and it's crazy to think that at some point in our tabletop role playing games career, people were just perfectly fine with going to the next room and fighting 2d6 orcs, repeating the
yeah,
process, right?
yeah. How it's evolved. Okay, we got a question in from YouTube. I know this sounds like a joke question, but how often does the bard seduce things? So, how often do you find the bard seduce things in your games?
That really comes down to the individual. So the bard seducing things, that's at this point becoming a stereotype when in reality it's every class seduces everything because it's not about the class that's seducing things, it's about the person playing you, right? So I often find that a lot of times it's not necessarily the bard, but in regards of specifically the bard seducing things, uh man, I can I've ran for at this point hundreds of people because I've ran a lot of different games. I've ran West Marches style that were open and stuff like that. I honestly have I believe I've only ever interacted with one bard ever that actually actively tried to seduce everything.
Oh, that's pretty good going, to be fair. I
Yeah.
think it sounds like I've not DM'd for as many people as you, and I think I can think of two bards that were a bit like that. I think one of them, it was sort of the situation where someone who is brand new to playing plays a rogue really edgy, and
Mhm.
then realizes, oh, actually, that's not very fun to do that. And it was the same situation. One of the players with the bards, they was like, oh yeah, let's play a bard and let's seduce everything, and then they realized quite early into the campaign, actually, that's not a very fun trope to have. Let's change it because it's a little bit awkward and not very, yeah,
I
doesn't
play the
really
bard.
add
I've got to be horny. I play the paladin. I have to be, the lawful nerd. Things
yeah,
like that. And once again, it's funny to think that at a point in our tabletop role playing game careers, that was how you played the
yeah.
game, and that was just the nature of it. But once again, as we've evolved over time, nowadays we realize that horniness is not tied to class; it's tied to the player.
Yeah, definitely. I do think it is a trap that quite a lot of new players fall into, the tropes. Because I've
Mhm.
had, when you said that, I've had the paladin who is righteous and only wants to do lawful stuff, and then they've been like, oh, actually, this isn't very fun. Let's add some more depth to the character, and it does take a bit of time sometimes when someone doesn't understand what D&D is. But then when they start playing, they're like, oh wait, so I can have a paladin that's also like this. So yeah,
I could play a horny paladin.
good. There's a subclass idea for someone out there.
Well, at one point they were developing a love cleric, but
Mm,
they found out that it was a little too creepy, so
yeah,
they nixed the idea.
definitely. Cool. Right, I'm going to take another question from Twitter. If anyone else has any questions who's watching live, just chuck them in the chat. Okay, so this one's Spooky Loop DM over on Twitter asks, are there any lies or secrets your PC is deliberately hiding from the player? So I guess the first question, do you manage to play much, or are you a forever DM?
I personally like DMing way more than being a player. But I am in fact a player in a game right now, and my character was actually holding on to a secret and still is holding on to several secrets. Um, I think the thing about PC secrets is more often than not, they're not used for the fun of the game. They're typically used for the fun of the individual. And obviously, that's a huge problem. When it comes to PC secrets, you have to realize that there needs to be some sort of meta-ness to it, that it is going to contribute to the fun of the group. It's going to contribute to the adventure at hand. I personally like to avoid that typically because once again, a PC trying to hold on to something that isn't part of the game that all of us join together, like specifically, for the people that write the 10-page backstory, that doesn't add to the game. That just adds to the individual. And in fact, I think it detracts from the group game.
Yeah, I've done it before where there's been some quite big PC secrets while I've been DMing that have affected the game, but I've only done it when the group already knew each other and were like friends and knew each other's play style. Because it can be quite dangerous if you're using one PC's backstories and lies and secrets, and they maybe should have technically told other players something beforehand because it affected some other part of the story. It does get a little bit messy, but I think if you've got a group that are all friends, all know each other enough to be able to just enjoy the story, then it can work pretty well.
For sure.
Cool. So one thing at a time on YouTube, saying I had to come up with an idea to play a bard who hated people. Decided to create a bard who performs with animals. Was really pleased that it could stray away from the standard horny bard cliche. That's different.
That's the anti-horny bard.
Yes, everyone stay away
I
from
don't
me,
love
please.
everybody. I hate everybody.
Definitely. I played a bard once that was a sword performer. So would like juggle swords and swallow swords and stuff like that. And it was a College of Swords bard. And I think a lot of people don't realize or don't think to make a bard that isn't musical, that is a performer in some other way. So coming up with performing with animals is a pretty cool idea there. Cool. We got a question from Alex on YouTube. What was your longest running campaign and how long was it?
Ooh. Okay, so I've got two pretty long campaigns. I have one which was a West Marches game. So in total it was just me as the DM, and I had at its peak, I believe, like 30 some odd players in it. I want to say 35. And it was a drop in, drop out sort of game. So anywhere between 3 to 8 players showing up to any single session. That one went on for 82 sessions. So that was a pretty decent sized West Marches game. I also have another campaign. I'd have to take a look at my notes about it, but I think I've ran them for. I've ran them through 3 campaigns now. I want to say 50, 26, and maybe I'm trying to think of how long the third campaign's been going. I think I've been running them for like 80 some odd sessions as well, and those people are definitely going to go on for even longer. I think we're going to get to like 100 sessions with that campaign.
Nice. So with the West Marches, is that a lot of organisation? I've never done a West Marches style. Actually, do you want to explain what a West Marches style is for people, just in case they don't know?
So West Marches style of game is a game where you as the DM or a collection of DMs host a public game and you say, hey, world, I'm going to be running a game on X day. Any of the players in this world can join. So, let's say I'm the only DM. I post up in wherever. I say, hey, I'm going to run a game on Tuesday at 5 p.m. Who wants to join? I get a bunch of people to join. They play the session. They go out into the world. They explore. They fight. They delve into dungeons. But the important aspect is at the end of the session, they return back to home base because there is no continuation. There is no singular story. There is no gravitating toward individual players or PCs. It is about the collection of the adventures therein. So it adds to the world. So I run a session on Tuesday, and it's got 4 people. I run a session on Thursday. It has two of the people from Tuesday, but then 2 new people, and they go to a different dungeon or they go and fight some other monster. And the idea of the West Marches style of game is that you can have a large collection of people who normally cannot commit to any one time because, unfortunately, in today's day and age, most people have a rotating schedule or are inconsistent and thus can't have a regularly scheduled program. And it's a great way to have a collective world which we're all contributing to. I really do like West Marches style of games. I can't wait to run another one. I'm going to be running one here fairly soon. It's a great way to just get a lot of people involved in something that they normally couldn't get involved in. And it is unfortunate that you can't exactly focus too much on any one person or any one PC, but the trade-off is that you get people in the game that otherwise couldn't get into the game.
And from an organization point of view, is it hard to do?
I would say it can be. It depends on the style that you're doing because West Marches is analogous. It can be done a number of different ways. I personally, the way I do it, it's very easy to organize because I simply have a community and I say, hey, I'm going to be running a game on this time. Who wants to join? And the first people that respond get to play in that game. Easy peasy. I'm not worrying about, trying to coordinate everyone else's time. I'm just coordinating my own time and people flock to me versus me trying to corral everyone together.
Cool. Makes sense. Right, on to the next YouTube question. So, when DMing a game, so this is from One Thing at a Time, sorry. When DMing a game, I feel like I do more of a single episode and not a series, and it makes it feel detached. Any advice for that?
Well, my advice would be to ask both yourself and your players, is that the style of play that you want? Do you want an episodic adventure where it's like, let's say, Adventure Time, where a single episode can be just, a fun little romp into the world and, it doesn't worry about the meta plot? Or do you want a series of adventures that truly do link together? Either way is perfectly fine. I personally like episodic adventures. I like the idea of showing up and doing something completely wacky, zany, fun, and short, sweet, to the point, versus potentially getting dragged into something that's long and arduous and it'll pay off in 8 sessions. When of course you look at that and it's like, 8 sessions, that's literally 2 months of my life. So ask yourself that's my first bit of advice. And secondly, if it does come to the point where you do want every single session to feel attached, you just have to basically recognize that, okay, 3 sessions from now, I want them to do X. How do I get them to do X? I'm going to give them the cookie crumb trails of Y and Z. So you give them hints, you give them foreshadowing, you give them rumors, you give them little snippets of the villain. You give them, just the tiny tidbits of, oh, hey, the villain is that guy. Okay. And then 3 sessions from now, they fight that bad guy. And then, oh, the bad guy gets away. And now he's going off to somewhere to hide. And then you spend the next 3 sessions trying to find where he's hiding. Things like that. But, going to the beginning of that, once again, I think the episodic style play is perfectly fine. Just figure out what you and what your group want.
I think I do a sort of episodic style thinking about it as well. So I'll quite often have like a time jump, basically, where I've been like, okay, well, between this session and next session, you're going to have 2 weeks of downtime, decide what you want to do, and stuff like that. And when I do want to connect it, something I quite like doing and has kept the players engaged a lot is trying to end the session on a cliffhanger. It's quite hard to do. It's not something that's just innately going to happen sometimes, and try not to force it. But if there's an obvious cliffhanger where you just can think, okay, well, let's not actually round this up. Let's just leave it here. That is a really good way to attach that episode to the next episode, if you want to look at it that way. It's the exact same way that TV shows do it, and it makes you binge watch stupid TV for ages. So it obviously works, and you can do that in D&D as well.
Find out next time on our D&D adventure.
Exactly. And then you'll find that your players are like trying to text you and stuff during the week, being like, oh, I can't believe this happened. What does this mean for my character and stuff like that? And it makes it just so that they're a lot more engaged, which as a DM is all you can ask for, really, is that people are just as excited as you are about your world.
For sure.
Cool. Right, on to the next question from Alex. What fantasy books have influenced how you view the game?
Ooh, what fantasy books? That would require me reading. I don't know how to read. Man, what fantasy books? Honestly, sad to say, I don't know if there's any actual fantasy books that have influenced my view of the game. Because quite frankly, I haven't read that many. I read Lord of the Rings, but I am here to tell you that Lord of the Rings is not an influence on my version of the game, because Lord of the Rings is old English and old fantasy. So it's
What
not
about
really.
any movies, games, TV shows, anything else?
Yeah, that's where I would say definitely that's where my view of the game comes from. Definitely newer show, or not newer, but relative to human lifespan, newer shows, video games, movies, things of that nature. Um, for like game purposes, I guess like Dragon Age and Witcher and what are the fun games are out there? It's Elder Scrolls, things like that. Those have definitely had some sort of influence on my games for sure.
Yeah, I also, so I read fantasy books, but the only ones I guess, and maybe this is cheating, but the ones that probably have had the most influence are the actual Forgotten Realms books. So like the Drizzt novels
Mhm.
helped me understand the Underdark a lot more. But I feel like that's cheating because they're literally books about
Well,
D&D.
they. I recently was talking to AJ Pickett about this, but in regards of the lore, I asked, I was like, how many people actually care about the lore in D&D? Because of the 40 million some odd people that are supposedly playing 5e, I'm willing to bet that not even half of them care about the lore. But reading the books influences your view of the game, because you obviously care. You're at least semi care about the lore if you're reading the books, right?
Definitely. Yeah, good point. The only other book I can think of is Mistborn from Brandon
Mm.
Sanderson. I've stolen some scenes from that book and put that into my games in the past. But I'm the same as you, where most of my influence have come from movies or games. Dragon Age has influenced my current campaign quite a bit, and Skyrim as well, quite a bit in the past. And I think that this is something I give as a tip to newer DMs who are struggling to think of ideas and stuff. Just think of some sort of media that made you extremely excited, be it a film, a book, a game, and then try to work out why that point made you excited, and then try to not copy it. Obviously, you need to change it for D&D and put your own spin on it, but you can do that. Okay, so Alex has given some other input here, saying West Marches are a lot of fun. So another West Marches fan, and so try grabbing something from one episode, a month-star item, and bring it up later in the episode. That was in regards to one thing at a time question earlier. And also saying having NPCs character develop over time and allow them to build relationships with the party. Cool. And Alex saying, good, my obscure fantasy inspirations are safe. I'm actually interested what inspirations you take from, Alex. There's quite a lot of people that also take inspiration from anime as well. I don't watch anime, so I don't do that, but I have heard people say in the past that anime has inspired them as well.
Yeah, semi recently in anime, there's been this humongous, overbearing trend of a genre called isekai, which is basically a genre of people in the real world being put in a fantasy world.
Oh, okay.
And there's been at least like I want to say like 100 different series over the past like 4 or 5 years that have done that. And so because of that, a lot of people are jumping into, fantasy role playing games and being like, oh, what if I run a game like that?
Yeah. Well, yeah, it's definitely a unique idea for a game. Cool. So we got another question from One Thing at a Time. What non D&D 5e book, either different setting or also support tools, that are worth recommendation? Anything that jumps to mind for you?
What non D&D 5e book, different settings or support tools that are worth
Yeah. So
recommending?
what I think there is the is non Wizards of the Coast book is what I assume
Yeah.
that means. So the one that jumps into my mind is a Tome of Monsters from Kobold Press.
Mhm.
I genuinely think that is a better monster manual than the monster manual. So I quite like to use those monsters because if you've got any veteran players, they won't know the monsters, which is always helpful. But yeah, that's the first one that comes to my mind. I've also gone back through the older editions books and stolen stuff from there as well. So I've stolen stuff from 4E and 3.5 and even Pathfinder as well. So yeah, there's some from me.
For me, a non D&D related or non D&D Wizard of the Coast book would be my own magazine, No Fun's Guide to Everything. But in regards of like, full on things, I genuinely like other game systems because surprise people, 5e isn't the only game system out there. But for example, being I love dungeon crawl classics. Things like this really do inspire me for the kind of game that I want to run because oftentimes 5e is presented in a certain manner because it has to, because 5e's mechanics work a certain way, you have to write a certain way. So when you look at other game systems, you look at other adventure modules for other systems and settings, it really does open up your ideas and perceptions on how you run the game and how you run your mechanics and things like that. Because, once again, for example, is Curse of Strahd. You mentioned Curse of Strahd's your most favorite module. I6 Ravenloft compared to 5e, it's vastly different. When you look at I6 Ravenloft back in the day, you were going in there with like, 8 PCs and a whole slew of henchmen, hirelings, followers, and retainers, and a whole bunch of people were going to die. But then you take a look at today's modern age of gaming, and nobody has hirelings or retainers anymore. It's typically a party of 4. It's typically, no one's dying, things like that. And you write the adventures to fulfill the style of play that's presented. So look at other game systems. I highly recommend Dungeon Crawl Classics. I highly recommend just old school stuff, and just to shake up your perceptions.
Yeah, definitely. That reminded me, talking about inspiration. I watch a few D&D live play streams and get inspiration from them as well, and also the videos like AJ Biggett you mentioned earlier makes, which are about Forgotten Realms lore.
Mhm.
Or some people make them on Skyrim lore as well. Mr. Rex makes on Skyrim lore. And just like watching those videos and getting deep into it and then extrapolating what you want to use from that and using it helps as well. Cool. We got so Alex, Rise of the Shield Hero is pretty good. The glass theme is probably my favorite soundtrack in anime. Not sure if you understand that reference, but as I said, I don't know anime, so I have no idea what that is.
Well, yeah, Rise of the Shield Hero. It's another in the monstrous line of isekais that's about a guy who falls into a fantasy world.
Cool. Okay, another question from One Thing at a Time. So, what module did you enjoy running the most 5e and also overall? So
Yes,
you said the oh, I forgot what it's called now. Tomb of
Tomb of
Annihilation. That's
Annihilation.
it.
Yeah,
It
so So Tomb of Annihilation, I've really enjoyed running it, and funnily enough, looking at it, you can clearly see the influence of old school play, specifically or like Advanced Dungeons and Dragons. When Tomb of Annihilation is essentially 4 old school modules thrown into one. It is a combination of Isle of Dread, the oh my god, what am I blanking on? Dwellers of the Forbidden City, Tomb of Horrors, and oh my god, Dwellers of the Underdark? No, something else. Regardless, that one is a very old school adventure, but it's written for 5e, and thus you can clearly see some of the mechanical influences on it. Next time I run Tomb of Annihilation, I'm actually going to be running it using old school rules, specifically a system that mimics Advanced Dungeons and Dragons.
Nice. Is there any modules you've played outside of 5e as well, or have you only played 5e modules?
Well, yeah, so I've ran a bunch of things like this, like Dungeon Crawl Classics, because the thing about 5e modules is they're way too friggin' big. I personally think that 10 to 40 page adventure modules are way better than 200 to 600 page adventure modules because quite frankly, one, most groups are going to fail. That is just the cold hard nature of a tabletop role playing game community, is that most groups fail. Most groups peter out. In fact, semi recently they came out with a study that like most groups drop after 6 sessions. So I like running a game, and as we just talked about episodic gaming, running a little adventure like this. This thing takes 1 to 2 sessions. Running a bunch of these back to back to back is going to provide you a fun, enjoyable, weird, crazy, chaotic experience. Whereas, unfortunately, I find with a lot of the 5e modules, there's a lot of dead space in between. There's a lot of time where you're running a 5e module and there's going to be whole sessions that you're going to forget. If you run a 50 session adventure, you're going to forget half of it. It's just going to happen. So just run short, quick, easy, fun, zany, crazy, wacky adventures. That's my take.
Oh yeah, that's some good advice there. Are you going to be running the new adventure that comes out in 2 weeks? Is it? 3
Call
weeks?
from the Netherdeep. I believe
Yeah.
I am. Yeah.
Nice. Yeah, I'm quite looking forward to that one. Hopefully, it is good. It's
Are,
the first
are
time they've gone into the sort
Mhm.
of never deep, as they're calling it.
I was about to say. So,
underwater.
are you a Critical Role nerd?
I am, yeah. So
Okay.
so that helps to some degree.
For sure.
I am, yeah. I've watched most of the third season and 1 and 2, so I know quite a lot of the lore. But that's not the only thing that excites me. It's more like the idea of having an underwater adventure, because I think they've done Ghost of Salt Marsh, which had some underwater elements, but it sounds like this one's quite a lot more based around that idea of
Yeah.
underwater going deep and stuff like that.
It's been really fun to speculate about the direction of the 5e modules because in the beginning, with Horde of the Dragon Queen and Rise of Tiamat, those were just generic fantasy adventure. But then ever since then, it's always been about certain biomes. It's been
Yeah,
about, I'm looking at the list here with Out of the Abyss, it's the Underdark. With Ghost of Salt Marsh, it's the ocean. With what do you call it thing? Watery Dragon Heist, it's the city, and so on and so forth. And so now that we're getting an underwater adventure, we're going to be looking at the whole thing of like, okay, they've covered this biome, that biome, that biome. Where are they going to go next? There's some things that they haven't covered, like they haven't covered a desert adventure, they haven't covered a sky adventure, they haven't covered a celestial adventure, they haven't covered a this and that. So I'm really looking forward to seeing what the future holds for that.
yeah, definitely. Yeah, and they every now and again as well they'll put in a completely different world like Eberron and stuff. So it'd be interesting if they do Spelljammer at some point. People have been asking for it for some time now, but
Oh yes.
they keep not doing it. Every time they tease a new book coming, everyone's like, "Is it Spelljammer? Is it Spelljammer? Is it Spelljammer?" And then it never is. Never. So surely at some point they'll do Spelljammer.
I mean, here's the thing: if they like making money, but sometimes companies just don't like making money, so
Yeah,
it's hard to
it's a
say.
weird thing, isn't it? Cool. Well, let's jump back over to some Twitter questions then. But anyone who's watching live, feel free to keep chucking some questions at us. So this is from Leechmon over on Twitter. How do you handle when PCs want to help each other to get advantage on insight checks? I guess
uh,
there's a wider question here as well. How do you deal with the problem when all players want to jump on doing a check?
yeah, so skill, dogpiling is classic rampart thing that's going on in the community. Some groups allow it, some groups don't, and that's honestly where a lot of the confusion comes from. If a player jumps from DM to DM, my personal take on it is one person, the best person at the table, does it, and they maybe get advantage, or they get a plus to the check, or it's a minus to the DC, or this and that. Specifically, when it comes to insight checks, what that's also another huge contention in the community because some people run insight checks like it's mind reading. I do not. Whenever someone rolls an insight check and the dastardly villain says, "Oh, hello there, sir," and then they're like, "Insight check." It's like, okay, you notice that they're looking at you quizzically. You notice that they're sizing you up. Like, I don't run inside checks like, oh, hey, I'm going to tell you scrolled a natural 20. I'm not going to tell you exactly what they are thinking, right? But yeah, once again, inside checks, much like all the other dog piling I do, just the best person does it, or whatever. You're
Yeah,
not
I
going to read
think
their mind unless you can read their mind, people.
yeah, I use insight checks the exact same, where they just get well. I like to think of it as like body language, like you're reading body
Mhm.
language. So that's how I usually describe it. It would be like, oh, you noticed that, yeah, although it's a cold day, there's a bit of sweat above his brow as if he's nervous about something. And then that's sort of the extent I give. And I think that is enough. Like, that still gives that player a big tick that they can then go and use later on if they want to or not. So that's how I use insight checks. And yeah, same for dogpiling. I just get whichever character it is that makes sense to it. So in terms of insight checks, sometimes it would just be the person who asked, because that makes most sense, rather than the person who has the highest stat. But yeah, that's pretty much it. Cool. We got some more questions in the live chat. Are you still good to keep going? By the
Yeah,
way,
yeah, yeah,
I know you've just jumped in
yeah, yeah, yeah.
as we've been going. Cool. So one thing at a time, asking, what's your favorite homebrew rule and most hated existing rule in 5e? Anything come to mind?
Oof. Man, favorite homebrew rule and most hated existing rule in 5e. There's a lot of bad rules in 5e, and there's a lot of homebrew rules I use. Man, that's a tough one.
I
Do
think
you have anything on the top of your head?
the favorite homebrew rule that I don't actually put in all the time, even though it's my favorite, which is weird, but it's because it's chaotic, is exploding crits. I'm not sure if
Okay.
you've ever run them. So they are, if you get a natural 20, you obviously roll your 2 damage dice. And then if either of those damage dice are max, so say it's a d8 and you roll an 8, you get to roll another one.
Ooh.
And then it just keeps going like that. So every single time you get max damage on a dice, you can roll another one. And it was good fun. And until it just kept happening, I had one player that rolled 7 in a row, and just completely destroyed that. And then I realized, oh, this pretty bad, pretty bad rule. But it was fun because I do sometimes. It's very disheartening if a player gets a crit and then rolls 2 ones on the dice and does nothing extra. So it's a nice way to sort of try to counteract that. But yeah, I do think it is quite chaotic.
The interesting thing about that is if you have a bigger dice, then it's way less likely, if you're using a D10 or
Mm,
D12 weapon, it's way less likely, but it's so much more rewarding. Versus if you're using a D4, it's way
yeah,
more likely, but also you have to be that much more luckier just to break even if you're using a better weapon. So that's
yeah.
pretty interesting.
I
Do you have a most hated existing rule in 5e?
Nothing jumps to mind. I guess the thing that jumps to mind isn't even a rule, but I don't like the idea of counting the items, like counting arrows and counting items and stuff like that. I think it's just not a fun thing that to make the players have to do. I try to keep my table as fun as possible, but that's not really a rule. I think there are some rules where it doesn't feel right, like mounted combat rules. I don't
You don't
feel
like the
think
whole one paragraph on mounted combat?
yeah, exactly. But I wouldn't say I hate the rules. I just feel like they didn't. And grappling's another one. I feel like there could be
You don't like
more
the
to
whole
it.
one paragraph on grappling?
Exactly. So there's some things like that where I just make up my own rules sometimes.
For me personally, one of the most hated existing rule in 5e. Honestly, I think death saves suck. For a number of reasons. Not just because I want to kill my PCs, no. But although killing PCs is a pastime of mine. My West Marches game that I played, 82 sessions, 79 dead PCs. So close to breaking
Wow.
even on that one. But death saves are not fun for a number of reasons, not just because they prevent PC death, but because they prevent PC play. Because guess what? If you get knocked down, then you're just sitting there. And then you just sit there. And then you just sit there. And also, very importantly, is for someone to bring you back up, that's going to be like their turn potentially, unless you allow healing words and stuff like that. But even then, like there's a lot of just downtime, and that's not fun. Which is why I personally prefer games where there is no disc saving throws, and if a PC does inadvertently die, then they take over their next henchman or hireling or retainer, and they're still playing the game, even though their beloved PC just died. They're still at least contributing to the table, rolling dice, interacting, doing all that fun jazz. But death saving throws just literally just take away from the game at hand, and they also lead to a death spiral because if a PC's down and you don't immediately like return them, then more PCs are more likely to go down, etc., etc. But my favorite homebrew rule, oh my goodness, I do quite a lot of random things here and there. I incorporate. I'm incorporating new classes. I'm incorporating new features. I'm incorporating new traits and things like that. God dang. I'd have to rack my brain for a long time about which one's my
That's
most favorite.
that's fine. We can skip there. You inadvertently, I don't know if you realised, but you also answered the next question because the next question was death saving throws. How do you handle them? And you amend the rules as written. So you sort of answered that as well.
Well, I mean, yes and no. So once again, I think death saving throws suck completely. Uh, there is a number of ways to handle it. Like you can just flat out make it 5e hardcore death mode engage, where you just say there's no more death saves, you die at 0. But unfortunately, the bounded accuracy of 5e dictates that you're going to take damage, and thus that will not work out. So like you will inadvertently just break the game if you just do that rule. Me personally, how I handle it most of the time is I bump it up from a DC 10 to a DC 11 so that it is truly a 50-50 because fun fact, people, DC 10 means you have a 55% chance of succeeding, not a 50-50. And yeah, that's just a quick simple one right there.
I think one thing I do I do the rules as written, but I think a lot of DMs would struggle to have their NPC or to have the PC take damage while they're unconscious. Whereas I'm not scared to have a rogue, I don't know, fireball hit the already unconscious person and make them have more death saving throws. Or I've even done it before where an intelligent person has basically taken an unconscious PC and threatened to kill them if they don't stop and stuff like that. So I think most of the time a DM will just, oh, that person's unconscious. Okay, let's go to hitting the next one. which is fine for some creatures that are a bit mindless and don't think. But if there's an intelligent NPC in it, they might actually use that to their advantage, and they definitely wouldn't try to put a fireball a few squares to the right to avoid that so it doesn't accidentally die. So I guess that's one thing I do differently to others, I think.
Yeah, and I think that's honestly another discussion too of narrative versus mechanics. Because narratively, if the villain holds a dagger up to the PC's neck and they're at 1 HP, then it's literally impossible to kill them, purely as written, right? But
Yeah.
narratively, it should truly be that if the villain has the dagger to the PC's neck, that they should be able to die.
Yeah.
So that's honestly a discussion you do have to have at your table with your players and say, hey, like how far does the narrative go? How far do the mechanics go? Because death saves truly do interrupt a bit of the narrative there. It may it's just so silly if you're at 1 HP and the raging monster just slams you down, you're more than likely not gonna die.
Yeah, exactly. Cool. Okay, let's go on to the last question then. We've got some other thoughts though from YouTube. So one thing saying insight isn't mind reading and charisma isn't mind control. I only allow insight if the player's interacted with the PC a few times. That is a good little tip there as well. And also saying so insight would work well as a tell on that PC if they lie or act different to normal. And then Alex saying no fun spitting some quick dice maths. Nice. Cool. So yeah, we're going to take this last question then, which is over on Twitch. So Fobzillas, I think is how you say that, over on Twitch. How much time and experience in D&D do you reckon you have to create your own homebrew campaign for a DM, or can you roll right into creating your own homemade? What's your view on this?
You need literally zero time at all. You could have created your homebrew world 20 years ago when you were a kid and just bring it up into D&D. The thing about, your experience in D&D is that, you know, we for some reason approach D&D with this monolithic idea that D&D is exactly this one thing, you have to run it this one way, but that's not true at all. You run D&D your own way and that's okay. Make your world truly your own, make the rules truly your own, make your table truly your own. Do those things. What I'm going to tell you is, in regards of the experience, experience does help quite a lot because, once again, or sadly, I'm here to tell you, you're going to suck. Both as a player and as a DM, when you first start off playing D&D or DMing D&D, you're going to suck. Much like riding a bike, you're going to fall off, but getting back up is going to be the experience. You trudging through. Now, in regards of creating your homebrew campaign and your homebrew world and this and that, what I'll tell you is if you don't want those, the ideas air quote tarnished, if you don't want them ruined, I would suggest a little bit of experience and instead first start off with like something light that you don't care about as much, because if it does get ruined, air quote ruined, then it's not as bad. But if you do start off and you run something you cherished and you love and you've worked really hard on, then maybe that's, that love and passion for it will truly carry your D&D game through.
Yeah, I actually started DMing in a homemade campaign, so I jumped in to the deep end as such. But to a degree, I actually think sometimes running a homemade campaign is easier than a module, because I think if there is something that you haven't prepared for in a homebrew campaign, you can make it up on the spot and then deal with the consequences later. But when with a module, it's harder because if you say something happens and then later on you realize how in the module that's actually screwed something up later on, it's a little bit harder because then you're going to have to homebrew the module. So to a degree, sometimes a homemade campaign can actually be easier. When I did it at first, I was running with my friends who are all brand new D&D players as well. So it was okay because, as you said, everyone is bad when they start playing off. And the main thing is is everyone having fun? Yes, we were having fun, so we kept going. So if you are looking to start DMing and you want to do a homebrew campaign, I would suggest trying to get some brand new players, just because then it'll be less nerve-wracking for you, because they're also just going to be as bad as you and trying to learn the ropes like you are. But yeah, I think as you said there, you're going to be bad if you do a module. You're going to be bad if you do a homebrew campaign for the first few sessions. So if you want to do a homebrew campaign, if that's what excites you about D&D, then go for it, because that's what excited me, was making my own campaign worlds and my own stories and stuff. So if that's what excites you, then go for it. And yeah, check out our channels and get a load of tips for it as well. There you go.
Heck yeah.
Yeah. So we got some last little insights here. So Alex saying the real problem with death saves is if I roll enough damage to kill PC, the dice killed them. But if they go down and I choose the monsters to attack, I worry the players will see that as me killing them. Yeah, I think what you said there is the key there, that you have to talk to them in session 0 or talk to them and make sure that they know that that is an option, that the monsters or the NPC could be the one that is killing them. But that is a good point. If you do have some players at your table that would take it personally, maybe you're going to have to tiptoe around it a little bit. And then Alex also saying 0 experience, trial by fire, which is a good one. We got one question coming in last second from One Thing at a Time, so we'll quickly do this one if that's okay with you.
Yeah.
So what was the most fun character for PC idea you came across?
The most fun character for a PC idea that I've ever come across is someone that's willing to show up to the table and play the adventure. It
Okay.
is unfortunately this thing. I mentioned this earlier, but some people want to show up with a 10-page backstory and bring in a concept and adventure and idea that wasn't originated from the table, for the table, by the table. There's a lot of individuality that is seeping into the game when truth of the matter is this is a group game. Unless you're running a one-on-one game, then that's fine. But if you're running a group game with a whole bunch of people at the table, I want all the characters to be made at the table. I want all the adventures to be made for the table. I want everyone to be involved with each other. Because if everybody is showing up with those 10-page backstories, it's far less likely that you're going to be diving into theirs and into theirs and into theirs. It's more along the lines of you're subjecting everyone else to your own. So the most fun character for a PC idea I've ever come across is someone showing up to the table, ready to enjoy the adventure at hand, and locking hands and singing "Kumbaya" as they go off and do whatever is presented in front of them.
Yeah, I've had players come up who didn't have a backstory at all, and then after a few sessions, found something that they were like, "Oh, this area sounds really interesting. So I'm going to now decide that I'm from this area, and have ties to this NPC, and stuff like that." And I thought that was quite fun as a DM as well, because it was sort of the same thing you're saying there, where they're making it at the table once they have the context. Because I've also had the other side where someone has made a character come and then realized it doesn't actually fit into the story at all, what they've made. So you can do that and it's absolutely fine. Cool. Thank you for all your questions then. Do you want to chuck a link to your channel in the chat if you can
Well, I
get to
mean,
it quickly?
if you insist, I shall. Let me grab that real quick, Lax.
Yeah, and thank you everyone for coming by. We do this show every Sunday, 9 p.m. GMT. I'm not sure what that is over the western side of the world. So thank you all for coming by. Yeah, do you want to say where they can find you then?
Yeah, how's it going? No Fun Allowed. You can find me on YouTube, where I cover a whole bunch of the adventure modules and guides. I also am doing a whole bunch of general DM tips, and I'm also diving into other game systems. And I'm also releasing a D&D zine filled with a whole bunch of new subclasses, feats, spells, abilities, game features, adventures, and so much more that you can find on my Patreon.
Cool. And then do you have a link to chuck to everyone there at all?
I put a thing on the YouTube there. I think I did. Did I not? I can't tell.
Come through? Can't see it.
Oh, because it probably
I've got
stops you from.
Oh, okay. I've got it there. There you go. I've chucked it in. I'll make sure it's down in the description afterwards as well.
Cool. Thank you.
Thank you everyone for coming by, and I will see you next week at the same time. See you then. Bye.